the very first thing is getting the business to understand that we're here to solve a problem. So focus on the problem. Don't really worry about the technology and the solutions and all the things that you can put in place to fix it. Try to identify what the problem is. And I'm going to tell you, firsthand experience, that's hard.
Welcome out, everybody. We're here with Dan McCoy, and if this is your first time hearing about Dan, I'm excited for you because he's got a really fascinating entrepreneurship journey and origin story, and so we're going to go into a little bit. And so, Dan, the very first question I want to ask you is do you consider yourself an entrepreneur?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. And when was the moment that you realized you were an entrepreneur?
I think probably growing up. I grew up on a ranch here in Texas, in the Texas Hill Country, but my mom ran a manufacturing company. And from day one, I've always wanted to be a business owner. I've always enjoyed manufacturing, making a product from raw ingredients to an end supplier and actually delivering that. And somehow in the meantime, I ended up in medical school. So not sure how you make those connections, but that's what happened.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about manufacturing is I feel like a lot of businesses don't understand supply chain, but manufacturing you're in the heart of the link of it all. What are some things that you learned from manufacturing that have just played into other things you've done in entrepreneurship and business?
Well, supply chain you mentioned right off the bat, managing labor, that's very important. Having product market fit is very important. My mom ran a manufacturing company that made uniforms, and during the time frame where she ran this company, uniforms were very popular. There were lots of American-based companies that made uniforms. It was very easy to have a product that fit the market, but things changed, and they became challenged. NAFTA, so that'll date me to show you how old I am, but NAFTA came along, created a huge amount of problems for them, both in sourcing their product to be able to produce. A labor pool got more challenging, and then also they had to compete differently on pricing, and that became a big challenge for manufacturing.
Now, the average listener probably doesn't really know what NAFTA is and how it impacted trade here in North America. When challenges like that, maybe give us a really brief amount of what that is, not an overly history lesson, but then how do you face major challenges like that in business? If there's things that are happening within your business, but then there's external forces too. So how do you adjust and pivot when external forces hit?
It's a great question, and NAFTA in the short form basically is that it improved the ability to do commerce with Mexico. So it was just easier to transport goods across the border, both raw materials one direction, finished goods the other. And it opened up a huge amount of labor force in Mexico to create cheaper products, which overall has been great for the United States economy. But small businesses, when you're really faced with rapid change, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. And in fact, it happens on top of running a business, which now may be even challenged on pricing, to be able to implement the systems and solutions and improvements that bigger companies could adapt to. So bigger companies could take advantage of global trade and use of NAFTA and maybe outsourcing or offshoring certain kind of things. But lots of local businesses don't have access to that. And so when we even want to think through the strategy of sitting down and talking about how you're going to compete in a new economy, most small businesses today are too busy trying to return leads or generate new business or sweep the floor, clean the bathroom, figuring out how to, today's world, the 48 steps to post a Facebook ad. Most small businesses don't have the time to even engage in a strategic discussion around that.
Yeah, there are too many. Each person is wearing way too many hats, right? And so they're trying to be able to be a specialist in something complex becomes really hard. And so you found yourself in medical school, and you've led a pretty impressive career, a lot of it in medical. Tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, how it maybe didn't take the straightest route.
It did not. And in fact, I thought I would practice medicine the rest of my life. I loved practicing medicine. I was a dermatologist. You could argue that's the best medicine to practice. We had great patients. I had great hours, and I loved what I did. When I went into practice, though, I quickly found that I had joined a clinic that had some business challenges. They had engaged in some relationships that weren't optimal. They needed to exit those relationships. And I found myself at a very young age having to engage in business turnaround. How do you actually make these changes to turn the business around? Fortunately, we were very successful. We were able to turn that practice around. I ended up getting hired by a large hospital system to come help them. But remember, I'm a dermatologist, and in a hospital system, we're like one step probably above beautician in a hospital system. So, not a long term hospital player. So I left and decided to open up a consulting firm to help businesses with turnaround, story, brand perception. And I continued to practice medicine. And then one of my clients hired me away. That's kind of how I ended up more in the business space than I do medicine anymore.
Yeah. And so tell us about that step into storytelling and brand and perception. Like how important are those elements in a business, and why did you find that was going to be the thing you were going to consult on?
Well, so when I went to college, I grew up in a small town, and I went to college and I decided I want to be a doctor. That's what went through my brain. And what I decided to do, but I was completely ill equipped to college. I had the worst case of imposter syndrome that you could possibly have. I even went to the dean's office and said, look, I don't belong here. You need to send me home, give my scholarship to someone else. And he basically told me, he said, look, just go back to class, fake it until you make it, and ask questions when you need to, but otherwise buckle down and study and do the work. And guess what? You'll be fine. And honestly, it worked. That's what I did. Fast forward 20 years later, when I start my consulting business, we came up with kind of a novel idea. And we kind of built this on top of Amy Cuddy's work at Harvard Business School, where she taught people that people could fake it till you make it. We were wondering, could we teach companies to fake it till they make it? Could we actually change the perception that a company has about themselves, the perception that they have in the community? And if they did that, would they actually become a better company? That's what we found. So we could go into companies, we could help them retell their story. The story resonated a lot more with their own employees. It resonated publicly. And what we found is when they started to tell the story that they organically wrote themselves, they started to believe it and live it, and the company actually performed better. And so that's really what we did in the consulting space is we taught companies how to fake it, create perceptions that they hadn't really gained yet, but they became. And it's a pretty powerful movement. We still get hired to help companies change their image, but what we really found is that they actually change their operations. And that became the reason that I get up and go to work every day.
So it's almost like the company learning to tell that story has an internal and an external impact. And so they actually change how they function, but while being changed, the perception of them as well.
Yeah, often, we get hired. The very first question somebody will tell me is that, well, we're not very good storytellers. Well, that we usually find that's not true, although they may not be telling the story effectively. Then they'll say, well, we don't really have a good story. I hear that a lot too. And typically what we do in those engagements is we'll immerse ourselves with the company. We want to visit with everybody, the people that are opening the door, the answering the telephones, not the CEO suite, not the board. Those are the last people we usually visit with. And typically what happens is these amazing organic stories come out of the company. And those companies typically will fit one of our genres that we think works really well, which is to try to accomplish something in telling your brand story that is different. And so we follow a really simple recipe. We like to have a lead. We want a big old lead paragraph, something that people can remember. Number two, we want to make sure that we have proof points to back up what we say. So we'll often work with companies to establish data and statistics and a few things that people can resonate on. And three, we want to capture the emotion. What's the emotional story? Because a lot of companies get caught up in sending. We even see that in small business. I need a website. No, you need to listen to your customers because that's actually what you really need to do. But so we focus a lot on teaching them how to send, teaching them how to listen, and then teaching them how to reformat that story and tell it again so that it resonates with the customer. So that's our process. That's
a
what
really
we do.
neat process. That's awesome. So if, a lot of the companies you work with are pretty large, but I know that you also have a passion for helping smaller businesses. What are some tips for small businesses they could apply today or really quickly into doing a better job telling their story or changing the perception in the market?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I think it's three things, right? That's the way I typically categorize it. Number one, small businesses are invisible. So people don't know where they are. And in fact, we opened two small businesses, chocolate factory, and nobody knew where we were. So that's number one. Number two, if people actually find you, you're often ugly. And typically that ugly is reviews because that's the very first thing that people look at it, typically online. We've created an entire society where nobody purchases anything with less than a 4.5 star review. It just doesn't happen anymore. And then three, you could be lucky enough in small business to not be invisible, for someone to actually find you and actually think you look okay, but you don't follow up with them because you're busy. Maybe you're flush with business right now. You're a roofer and you've had a hailstorm and you got roofs everywhere, but all of a sudden you get a patch of good weather and you need business and you never responded to those leads that happened when everybody was thinking about hailstorm. So you don't follow up on that. So we think that really minor changes can make some pretty big differences in the way that businesses outcome, mostly because they can focus on those three things right out of the gate.
Yeah. And, it's fascinating. Sometimes we think that the answers to, like, what's the secret to business is going to be revolutionary and crazy, but oftentimes it comes down to, are you doing the fundamentals, right? And so many times in businesses, like what you mentioned, the roofer with the hailstorm, you're chasing the leads, then you go service the leads, and by the time you're done servicing all of the business, you've emptied your lead pool. Like, you haven't nurtured again, right? So you're not keeping a consistent flow. How do you help businesses transition from that feast or famine way of living into a more consistent, healthy growth pattern?
Well, I think the very first thing is getting the business to understand that we're here to solve a problem. So focus on the problem. Don't really worry about the technology and the solutions and all the things that you can put in place to fix it. Try to identify what the problem is. And I'm going to tell you, firsthand experience, that's hard in a small business. I mean, listen, I'm a big company CEO. I thought I knew what I was doing. I launched a chocolate factory. We were in business about 9 months. And I get on Google and Google chocolate in our local community, and our business ranked below Pizza Hut for chocolate. Okay. That's how bad that it was. And I became obsessed with, how do I raise my visibility? What are we doing wrong? I think a lot of times it's understanding the problem. And the problem for a small business can be right in front of you. But you really need to have a conversation with a strategic partner to help you kind of figure out what that problem is. And so that to me is step one. Deep understanding what's wrong with the business. Where do you see you want to go? What are the challenges you have every day? And then layer on top of that solutions that don't break the bank, that can help you solve those solutions in an incremental way. And in small business, you can't solve 50 problems the first day. But often, if you can get quick wins, then you can start to build things like that lead pool, because you just build it off your current customers. Could just be retargeting customers that you've used in the past, depending on your business. That could be the easiest thing. And you've just really never done that. Maybe you've never built Google reviews. So for us, I was able to put our chocolate factory on the first page of Google search in 30 days. And I did it through two things. I did it through going after our reviews. We had great reviews, but we didn't even respond to them. So people took time out of their day to put a review, and we didn't even respond to it. We didn't nurture good reviews. So that's one. And then two, I didn't even know that we could quickly citation list our business on multiple search areas. So I didn't buy a keyword. I didn't buy a Google AdWord. Not going to say that you shouldn't do that, because there's some opportunities for that. But two simple things. Once I realized what the problem was, I could overlay automations and solutions to make that really simple. And guess what? We're now on the first page of Google search.
Yeah, that's cool. Now, I want to make sure that before we end this episode, we address the fact that you went from, growing up on a farm to med school to, big company CEO and a consultant to starting a chocolate factory and a winery. How did that happen? And tell us a little bit about those two.
Sure, absolutely. So I ran a big insurance company, Blue Cross Blue Shield. Probably heard of it. I still like blue. You can see the background. So I'm a strong Blue Cross supporter. And And I stepped down about 3 years ago, and I still do consulting. I help big companies with problems, and we decided to open up a small business. And I had made chocolate for 23 years, and we decided we would open a chocolate factory and a winery here in the Texas Hill Country. It's the second busiest wine region in the U.S. outside Napa, so it made a lot of. We thought. Remember, product market fit. We thought we had a product. It was kind of in a good area. Not a lot of competition, which is another reason we thought this was a good idea. And I saw firsthand the challenges that small business have. The tools are expensive. So on a relative basis, you want to solve challenges in small business, you're going to pay on a relative basis more than those big companies pay. Number two, you're not going to get the strategic advice on how to fit them within your company. And so I became obsessed, and I thought, you know what? We can bring these tools to small business. I have experience in doing that on a big company side. There's absolutely no reason we can't leverage and focus that scale to lower the cost and bring that strategy to solve these businesses and solve the problems in small business. And so that's what led us to build RocketTools.
That's really cool. And so we're going to talk more about RocketTools and what you guys are building there. So hopefully everyone can go check that out, rockettools.io. And Dan, really great getting to know you a little bit and talking through your journey, and looking forward to our next episodes.
Great.